How many times did you tell the story of the Exodus last night? Were you keeping count? Three? That's a lowball number. No. The Seder is designed to force you to tell the story of the Exodus, depending upon how you count, at least about a dozen times. Now that may seem a little bit like overkill, maybe a little bit like Dayenu, which, by the way, is one of the ways that you get to tell the story of the Exodus. Dayenu is a whole story by itself, as are the four children, as are the four questions, as are the introductions, the outroductions, all the songs. It's at least, like I said, conservatively, a dozen times. So do you know the story of the Exodus? Well, come on. Nobody is like willing to stand up and say, I know one. You know the story of the Exodus? Maybe a little bit? Give me the skeleton. Give me the skeleton of the story then. What's that? Moses is saved from the Nile. That's too specific. I said skeleton, not meat and bones, or not meat and tendons. The skeleton.
Moses realizes who he is and who his people are, and he asks Pharaoh to let his people go.
You think Moses is the main character here? That's a bit of the story, indeed. It's a bit. It's kind of like the left, kidney, maybe. The skeleton. They tried to kill us. We won. Let's see. That's a little too skeletal. All right. We were slaves in the land of Egypt, and God took us out of Egypt with a mighty arm, with an outstretched hand. That's the skeleton of the Exodus, which is a pretty good skeleton, and one that I would imagine most of us feel quite comfortable repeating when the rabbi's not putting you on the spot, as being the explanation for why we have this holiday known as Pesach, or indeed, why we as Jews exist. But if we want to get into the details, well then, how comfortable are you? Moses was put into the Nile and was saved by Pharaoh's daughter. We all feel comfortable signing on the dotted line that yes, 100% we're okay with that. Later on, that same guy came back to the Nile that he had been thrown into, along with all of the other Jewish boys, and turned it into blood as a symbolic refutation of the murder that had taken place in that very same water. Feeling comfortable on the blood? Not so much. Not so much comfortable on the blood because we don't like blood and we're squeamish, or not so much comfortable in the blood because, come on, blood? Really? The whole Nile turned to blood? And frogs? Or, as Rashi put it, a giant frog? Everybody always gets a kick out of Rashi's interpretation. There is good understanding for why that is there, and we'll talk about that later if you're very interested. A giant frog? You're happy with that? Or just a bunch of frogs? 5 million frogs. A plague of frogs, you might say. Darkness that lasts for 3 days that you can't touch, that you can touch and feel. Fiery hail coming out of the sky. Locusts, to mention a little bit. And then my favorite part of the Universal Studios backstage tour when I was growing up, the parting of the sea. I don't think they still do it anymore because it's considered passé. But when I was growing up in Los Angeles, the Universal Studios tour used to go around on the little trams, if everybody remembers those, before roller coasters took over the world, and you would go through different scenes of different movies. And one of the scenes they had when I was growing up was the parting of the sea. You'd approach this long strip of water, and the little tram would line up, and you'd start going into the water, and then whoosh, the water would part, and you'd go through the little gully, waves on each side of you, and out the other side, and on to the next little scene. It's a great scene, right? Cecil B. DeMille made it famous, and Prince of Egypt, because he got animation going, blew it out of the water. Thank you. Actually, I just learned recently that whole scene in Prince of Egypt took 2 years to animate, just the crossing of the sea, because of the level of detail that's going on there. historically inaccurate movie, but a very, very beautiful movie. So, we comfortable on that? What I'm basically asking is, do you believe in the Exodus? Do you believe it happened? We're here. We're here. Do you believe the details of how it happened as presented in the book behind me? That's yes. And some people, maybe. In fact, there's a very famous conservative rabbi in Los Angeles who actually made the news by saying, maybe it didn't happen in the Prince of Egypt style of animation that we imagine when we read through the text. And there are many academics who make entire careers out of trying to disprove the Exodus from Egypt. It is quite a hot-button topic, and something that I'd love to talk about in more detail from an academic point of view, but for today we are talking more emotional, more spiritual. Because I will tell you that if you do not believe in the Exodus, you're doomed. You're in trouble. You're in trouble. And I don't mean God is going to get you. I'm not talking about, you're going off to hell or something like that. But spiritually, emotionally, you're in trouble. And I'm not talking about whether you believe that the walls of water were 3 foot high, 10 foot high, 50 foot high. That's not the detail that I'm concerned with. I'm concerned with the skeleton detail that we started with. That we were oppressed, and God took us out with a mighty hand. Because if you don't believe that, then you believe that oppression is unending. And in fact, much of the world did before and after the Exodus believe exactly that. That those who were on the bottom were on the bottom, and they deserved to be on the bottom. And nothing was going to change that. They were oppressed because that was who they were. And if they could be on top, they'd oppress me, but they're not, so I get to be here. Too bad, not so fun to be you. And along comes Judaism and says, no, that's not the way it works. In fact, those that are oppressed can rise up. Those that are oppressed have the right, have the dignity of their humanity to be free and not be ground into the dust for your profit, your pleasure, your exploitation, whatever it is you think you're accomplishing by the enslavement that you have put upon these people or any other form of oppression. It ain't right. It's not right. And Judaism revolutionized the world by saying that. But it did so with a bit of an edge that often gets lost. Because it says, we were slaves, and God took us out with an outstretched arm. And where did we go? Israel, oh, now you're skipping way too far. To the desert. We left Egypt, and we went to the desert. And that wasn't easy. The thing that the Exodus tells us honestly, that gets lost in the animated version, gets lost in the Cecil B. DeMille version, gets lost in many people's telling, is that the Exodus didn't lead us into a more profitable existence. The Exodus did not lead us into a more comfortable physical existence. The Exodus did not reward us in all of the ways that most of the people on earth, then and now, keep score of what is a good life. We went from having enough to eat to having nothing. We went from having enough to drink to having nothing. We went from the security that tomorrow, as long as I kept my head down, did my work, made my bricks, I could go on living, to, I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. We might get attacked by the Amalekites. We might get overrun by other groups. We might do something that leads us into utter disaster and failure. Who knows where we're even going? Moses does? Okay, fine. But I'm not sure about that. And indeed, we spent years and years and years complaining about precisely how worse it was to be in the Sinai than it was to be slaves in Egypt. And that's what I mean if you don't believe in the core of the Exodus, you're doomed. Because that generation who could not get over the fact that leaving Egypt was better for them despite their material discomfort, that generation was doomed. And that generation had to die in the wilderness, and their children, who took their place, were able to follow Joshua, as we talked about in the Haftorah, into the land of Israel. Because the parents couldn't understand what they had experienced. All they saw was, we weren't slaves anymore, and now things are worse. Sure, I'm free to starve, free to die of thirst, free to be in an army to defend myself against these horrible people all around us, free to eventually, you promised, tell me we're going to go conquer a land where the people have massive fortified cities and giant armies that are going to crush us. If that's freedom, I want slavery. They didn't get it. They didn't understand the message of the Exodus that they had experienced. And Jews have had to understand it for the last 3,000 years, because that wasn't the only Exodus we ever had. How many of you have ancestors that came from Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Ukraine, Russia, Belarus? A big number in the room. And you go back a little bit farther. How many have ancestors that came from Germany, from France, from Belgium, from England, from Italy, from Spain, from North Africa? Well, guess what? All of those people had their own exoduses at different times. Hundreds and hundreds of expulsions, whether it be from a town, whether it be from a principality, whether it be from an entire nation. Hundreds and hundreds of times over the last 2,000 years, in every corner where the Jews lived, we were expelled. I know, that's not exactly what you put on the brochure. But those that actually left, those were the survivors. Because there were people who stayed. We don't talk about them a lot, but we should. Every time we were being expelled from a country, from a city, from a town, or wherever, there was a choice. There were people in every expulsion that we had that chose to stay. They had to give up being Jewish, but they chose to stay. Those people were doomed. Those people are gone. Those people are lost into the annals of history and lost the treasure that was Judaism. But the majority in all of these cases said, I would rather be free somewhere else than be a slave to your domination here under the false title of now being one of you. Everyone that left rejected that bargain. Everyone that left thought, I would rather lose everything I own, my house, my business, everything, leave only with the clothes on my back, then stay with whatever material comforts I might have and give up what's in my soul. And it was the decision of all of those that had learned from the children of the Exodus, not the adults, that meant that Judaism continued to exist. If they had not had the courage to walk into the desert, to walk out of wherever they lived when they were given this choice, we would not exist as a people. We would be gone. We would be dust. And Judaism would never have been able to continue to influence the world with that message that that's not right. It's not right to treat people like that. It's not right to try and destroy a nation like that. And who would then stand up for anyone else? We are the children of the Exodus. Not just the Exodus from Egypt, but the Exodus from towns and cities around the world, of those of our ancestors who had the courage to say, we should leave, we should go, we should hide until we can flee. We can take what we can, but it is not worth it to stay if this is how it's going to be. To look and say, it is more precious to me that I preserve what the Torah teaches than I preserve what is in my bank account. And the millions of Jews throughout history that have made that choice have ensured that that understanding of justice, of righteousness, that understanding of God would be preserved. That we would say, yes, we were oppressed, but God took us out with an outstretched arm. We may have had to leave a lot of stuff behind, but we kept what was essential. We kept what was important. We kept us, despite anything that was done. We will never be slaves again. We will always be free, and no matter where we end up, we will make it our home, and we will make ourselves free there. We have done it before, we'll do it again, and God willing, we'll take the world kicking and screaming along with us into the idea that freedom is universal, that freedom is part of God's creation. We are the children of the Exodus. Shabbat Shalom and Chag Sameach.